to the bachelor's, interviewing without the angst. I'm Crystal Bailey, and I'll be your host for today's broadcast. Thank you all so much for joining us. APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. Today's presentation features Karyn Rosen and will be moderated by Amanda Palchuk. Karyn will be speaking today about taking the angst out of interviewing and how to develop your interviewing skills. After Karyn finishes her presentation, the remainder of the program belongs to you for our question and answer session. Because of the number of people attending this webinar, we are only accepting text questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please type it into the questions panel located on the right side of your screen. I also want to remind our listeners that you can continue to submit questions through the questions panel throughout the webinar, and we will answer all of your questions at the end. We will do our best to cover all the questions you submit, but want to apologize if we're unable to cover everything. Finally, a link to the recording of today's presentation will be emailed to you after today's event, and it will also be available on the webinar homepage for this presentation. We encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. And so with that, let's get started. Moderating our discussion today will be Amanda Palchuk, newly minted graduate student. If some of you got the invitation and that said that she was an undergrad, that was incorrect. She's a newly minted graduate student at the University of Southern Mississippi. Amanda received her undergraduate degree in physics with a minor in mathematics from the University of Southern Mississippi in May 2011. After completing her degree, Amanda participated in the 2011 SPS National Summer Internship Program, where she worked on the AIP Career Pathways Project, which is designed to help prepare students for careers in science and technology after receiving their physics bachelor's degree. During the summer, Amanda reviewed and compiled resources on finding a STEM career with a bachelor's degree in physics, which will ultimately be used as a supplement at student career workshops held at annual SPS Zone meetings. As a graduate student at USM, Amanda instructs the General Physics Lab for non-majors at her university's campus and serves as the Society of Physics Students president. Upon completion of her master's, Amanda would like to pursue a number of different physics careers, such as physics education or research. And so with that, I will turn things over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Crystal. Today we have Karyn Rosen joining us to talk about interviewing without the angst. Karyn Rosen, MED and Certified Professional Coactive Coach, is on the College of Science Co-op faculty at Northeastern University in Boston, Massachusetts. There, she teaches a course, Introduction to Professional Development, and works primarily with math, physics, and biomedical physics students, helping them become prepared for searching and interviewing for their co-op jobs. Previously, Karyn supported NU's Career Service Center, offering resume and cover letter editing, advanced interviewing skills, and job search strategy. Prior to Northeastern, Karyn held a variety of marketing positions at IBM and coached and facilitated career assessment workshops for local IBM employees. Karyn earned her undergraduate and graduate degrees from Salem State University in Salem, Massachusetts. She holds a certificate in advanced graduate study in healthcare administration and earned a certificate in professional coactive coaching from the Coaches Training Institute. Karyn, we are thrilled to have you presenting today, so I will turn it over to you so we can all learn about interviewing without the angst.
Great. Thank you, Amanda, for that great introduction. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And I just want to confirm, Amanda, that you can see my presentation.
Yes, I can see it.
All right, let's get started. So over the next 35 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through some steps that will help you take the angst out of interviewing. I can't think of many people who relish the thought of job hunting and sitting in front of an interview panel to interview for jobs, but hopefully this presentation will help take some of that anxiety away from you. So this is what I'm going to be going over with you. First of all, reviewing what you need to have for your pre-interview checklist, including we'll review some things about your resume, checking out what to do with the job listing. FAIQs are frequently asked interview questions, and car stories we'll talk about in a few minutes, doing your research, what employer questions to have available, and then once the interview is over, it's not totally over, some things that you have to do to follow up. So first of all, there's really no substitute to being prepared for a job interview. The first thing on your checklist is your resume, of course. And what you want to be sure about is, does your resume accurately reflect your work and your school experiences? We want no fudging, no lying. We want it to be accurate. Is it easy to read and formatted nicely? And for most of you, it should fit on one page. If it does happen to flow onto 2 pages because of publications primarily, you want to have your resume heading at the top of each page, because you never know when pages are going to get separated on the other end. Did you also include any awards you received, interests, groups, and club memberships? And the reason why I suggest students include these is because you never know when an interviewer, when something you put on your resume is actually going to strike interest in an interview. Maybe they've traveled to the same place as you. Maybe they speak a second language like you do. Maybe they participated in a similar group when they were an undergrad or a graduate student. So I think it's always fun and interesting to see if that section on your resume, awards and interests and groups, generates any discussion in the interview. The next thing on your checklist to be prepared is to take a really close look at the job posting. And I recommend that you get out a highlighter pen and you look at the job description, and as best as you can, highlight what that employer is looking for. Then what you want to do is map. See if you can align your primary skills with what the employer is looking for, so that when you are in that discussion, either on the phone or in person, you can say, this is what I understand based on the job description you are looking for, and this is why I believe I'm the best person, because I have these skills acquired through this particular experience. So as best as you can, and I appreciate that some job descriptions are not as good as others, but again, as best as you can, identify the needs of the employer, highlight them in the job description, and then do your best to align your skills with what the employer is looking for. There's no way around it. You need to rehearse. You need to rehearse your answers to frequently asked questions. And one technique that actually I learned at IBM was the idea of using what we call CAR stories, challenge, action, result stories. These, if you think of a challenge or a task that you faced, identify it. Then list a few of the actions that you took to address that challenge or task, and then identify what the result was. You should be able to give that kind of a CAR story in probably 45 seconds or less. Frequently the questions that employers ask now are what we call behavioral-based questions. Tell me about a time when. So you need to package a little story. And frequently we find ourselves rambling. So the idea of using the challenge, action, result, the CAR stories, enables you to package your story in probably about 45 seconds or less. In fact, I think I'm going to test something out now. Amanda, are you ready to play with me?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe you're a TA, correct?
Yes.
Right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So thinking about responding in the challenge, action, result format, tell me about a time in your classroom or working with your students when a class that you had planned did not go as expected.
A few weeks ago, I was teaching a lab, and one of the critical pieces of equipment to actually carry out the activity stopped working for all of my students. And it being my first time to teach a lab, I had to think quickly on my feet because it was during my class. So instead of trying to work out the technical difficulties that were going on with the equipment, I actually had the students write in their lab reports why they think the equipment stopped working and how they know what sort of answers they're supposed to be getting based on the material. So even though everything glitched up in the lab, they actually got a better understanding of, you know, the subject material and how to troubleshoot in a lab. So even though they weren't getting the answers that they should have been getting in lab, they actually learned a lot more had they got the correct answer, because they really had to take a step back and analyze why their answers weren't correct. So I think having dealt with the challenge in that way actually came out with a really nice result.
Great, fantastic. Okay, so I hope everybody I probably should have given you this before we had Amanda give her story, to identify what the challenge was, see if you nailed it, what the action was, and what the result was. But what Amanda shared was that a piece of equipment didn't work that she thought she really needed to help teach that particular class. So what actions did she take? She quickly thought of an alternative and asked the students to identify why they thought the equipment wasn't working. And what was the result? The result was the students probably had a more effective learning experience than they would have had otherwise. Great story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we can never always be sure. We certainly can't be sure of every interview question that's asked, but the typical ones are certainly tell me about yourself, strengths and weaknesses. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? I want to tell you that if you get asked what are your primary weakness, what's your primary weakness, or tell me a couple of weaknesses, you don't want to go on and answer that question for long. You want to identify what the weakness was quickly, and then you want to indicate, always indicate what you are doing to improve upon that. You always want to leave the interviewer with the impression that you understand that you have a weakness in a particular area. Doesn't necessarily mean subject. It could be organizational skills. It could be time management, and what you were doing to improve upon that weakness. Frequently, like I said, behavioral-based questions. Tell me about a time when, and that's when car stories really come in handy. Why do you want this job, and why do you want to work for this company? Keep in mind, are two totally separate questions. Why do you want this particular job? Think about what you read about in the job description. Think about what you know about that kind of work. Why do you want to work for this company? The job could be great, but then you decide that, gosh, this company is not at all. It's too big for me. It's located in another part of the country. People move around too much. So do understand that the why do you want this job and why do you want to work for this company are two totally separate questions, but you need to be prepared to answer those. Okay. The next thing in being prepared is research. Would you believe that the average number of hours to research, to prepare for a particular job interview is 8 hours? I found that statistic actually a bit surprising, but that's what the data shows, is 8 hours to prepare for a job interview. There are 3 types of key research that you need to do in preparation. you're going to check out the company, including the competition. And gosh, with so many electronic devices and with the web and with Google, it's not all that difficult to do your research on the company. You want to go into an interview knowing about that company. A great place to look certainly is on the company website, and to find out what they're doing currently, check out their press pages. What kind of PR are they getting lately, and what are their recent, check out their recent press releases. You want to have a good understanding of the industry that that company is in, and you want to look up the people. You want to do some research on the people, and CEOs, company officers, maybe even HR recruiters who are there. Now, the CEOs and the company officers you can probably find on the company website. But another great place to look is through LinkedIn. And hopefully all of you have a LinkedIn profile. I think it's a phenomenal resource. It enables you to find out about career paths of people who may be interviewing you. Also has brief descriptions about the company. You can also use it to look for jobs. So you're going to do your 3 types of research. You're going to look at the company, you're going to check out their competition, you're going to check out the industry, and you're going to use the company website and LinkedIn to research the people who are primarily going to be interviewing you. Okay. So an interview is not just about, it's a two-way street. It's not just about having the company decide if you're a good fit. You want to discover if the company and the job is a good fit for you. So being prepared means going into your interview with a list of some questions that you want to ask the interviewer. So think about, I basically just answered why ask questions, because you want to find out if this is a good fit for you. How many questions do you think would be right to ask? I'll get to that in just a minute, but think about it. And what questions might be appropriate for you to ask the interviewers? So here are a few examples. I would say that the minimum number of questions per interviewer is 4. I'm sorry, the maximum number of questions that you want to ask each person who's interviewing you is probably 4. So here are a few samples of some typical questions that you can ask. What would my typical day be like? I'm curious about your career path. How did you get this position? Why do you like working here? I don't have to read all of these to you. So you can ask a couple of those typical questions that I have listed there under a few samples. And then you want to ask a question related to the company or industry, right? You did your research. You looked at maybe some recent press releases. Ask a question about something that you read. It shows the interviewer or interviewers that you did check out the company, that you did go to their website. There is one question, the final question that you ask. You should not leave without asking it. Actually, there are 2. One is, when do you expect to be making a hiring decision? You really don't want to leave that interview without knowing when you might be getting a call back. And or what their interviewing process is. You know, they may say, well, as you know, we're bringing in candidates all this week, and we expect to bring our finalists in for a second round of interviews within the next couple of weeks. Great. That's what you want to know. And then the very last question is, you don't want to leave the interview without asking for business cards, because you want to have the contact information and the correct title of all the people that interviewed you. Okay, so even though you may look really fantastic on paper, that doesn't paint the whole picture of who you are and what employers value. So when you go in for your interview, these are some of the qualities that employers value and that you want to be able to demonstrate. Your positive attitude, your enthusiasm, you want to be able to speak clearly and concisely, demonstrate that you're very personable, easy to talk to, easy to get along with, and that you're confident, self-motivated, and opportunities where you can demonstrate leadership will go a really long way. All right. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about, what does chemistry have to do with interviewing? For physics majors, well, if you go into an interview and you feel that there is just no connection, you feel there's no connection, or vice versa, the employer feels there's no connection or chemistry, then there's a good chance you won't get called back for a second interview. So one of your goals in going into that interview is to have the interviewers, have the company feel that you're personable, that you're easy to like, and that you would be easy to be around, and that they would want you to be part of their team. So you may think that after the interview you're done, and you wipe the sweat off your brow and you say, oh, thank goodness that's over. However, it's not totally done. So after the interview, one thing that I recommend is that you just jot down a few quick notes about what you really want to remember about the discussions that you've just had. And I want you to know that if you think about an interview as being basically a conversation with a purpose, it can take some of that anxiety away as well. So you leave the interview and you jot down your notes, and then when you get to a place, which is easy to find now with all the iPhones and everything, you want to send in a thank you note to all the people that interviewed you within 24 hours. And that's another reason why you want to have, why you want to collect those business cards before you leave. So you're going to jot down notes after the interview, and you're absolutely going to send a thank you note. Do you know that I have students who have either won or lost their co-op jobs because they either sent or they did not send a thank you note? It's important, and it's remembered. Okay, so you can't be prepared for every single question as much as we'd like to think that we could. And this little cartoon certainly demonstrates that. And frequently, the interviewer isn't looking for a particular answer, but they may be looking for a process that you used or that you implemented to come to a solution. They just want to know how your mind is working. Okay. So in conclusion, if there are just a couple of things for you to remember before you go out on your next interview, remember that you could try to wing it, but it may not be all that effective. You want to do your research. You want to research the company, the industry, and the people that you're probably going to be talking to. You want to practice frequently asked interview questions. You want to rehearse your car stories. You want to have a few of those identified in your back pocket that you'll be able to use actually in a few different situations, either at a networking event, a career fair, a social gathering, or in an interview. They come in those car stories come in really handy. And then you want to do more research, and you want to practice, more practice, and you want to breathe a lot. So I might have gone through that a little too quickly, but it gives us plenty of time now for some questions.
Yes, we actually have a lot of great questions so far. The first question that I would like to ask Karyn is, does the excessive amount of preparation and showmanship involved in the process undermine the basic purpose of an interview?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but the fact that you took the time to do your research will definitely come across in the interview and will help the folks who are interviewing you appreciate how interested you are or aren't in the job. I don't know if I answered the question or not, so.
Okay. Well, I think that is a sufficient answer, so we can move on to another question.
Okay.
So how exactly would you answer a question on salary? Like, how much do you expect to be paid at this job if you're asked that during an interview?
Oh, good question. So technically, salary should not come up until an offer is about to be extended. It should not come up, and I know the word should has a lot of judgment around it. It should not come up certainly in an initial interview, but frequently it does. So part of your research is probably going to a website like salary.com to find out what a particular job title in the part of the country where you are is offering, what someone in that position is actually earning. And if you continue to be pressed by the interviewer about that question, then you can say something like, according to my research, I know that people in this position with my level of experience typically earn in a range of $55,000 to $75,000, and I would like to be paid commensurate with other people who have my level of experience and education as well.
Okay, that's great, because I know a lot of people wonder what they should answer, you know, to that question during an interview, because it is kind of a complicated thing. I do have another great question for you. So when you were talking about practicing for your interview and how important it is, who should your target practice audience be? Should it be family, friends, friends of your family?
Oh, great question. And I don't mean to be sarcastic about this, but basically anyone who will listen to you, anyone whose opinion you trust. Sometimes it's a little difficult with people who know you really well, but they may be able to think of things that you've experienced either in work or through volunteering or in school that you have forgotten about. So I would say anyone who will listen.
Well, I'm sure that that would be a lot of people, so seems like everyone is going to be in good shape whenever they're practicing. So another question that I would like to ask is, what sort of attire should you dress in for an interview, and would the same apply for a phone interview?
Okay. So some of this depends on the type of company where you're interviewing. If you happen to be interviewing at an IBM, you're going to go in, for gentlemen, a suit, a nicely pressed shirt, and a tie. If you are, and you know what, I'm going to qualify that a little bit. If you're going in for a research position, you can always ask what the dress code is there. You may not have to wear a suit jacket or a sports jacket, but I would probably wear, for guys, definitely a press shirt, a tie, and maybe a sweater over it. Could be a little bit more casual than a suit and a tie. If you're going for an executive type position, then it's definitely a suit and a tie. If you're interviewing for a research position on campus, then I would also dress in what I would call business casual, which is for guys, sweater, again, the sweater, tie, shirt, nicely pressed pants, no flip-flops, no sneakers. For girls, the equivalent would be either a suit for one of those professional jobs in sort of a Fortune 500 company, if you will. Or again, if you were interviewing for a research position on campus, probably a nice pair of pants, slacks, and top, or a skirt. Again, no flip-flops, shoes that you feel comfortable in, no sneakers. With regard to a phone interview, no one can see you, right?
Right.
I could be sitting here in my yoga clothes, you wouldn't know, but knowing that I was going to be doing this, and I recommend this to my students too, is to dress in business casual clothes, because it helps you get in the mood and know that you are doing something other than talking to a friend on the phone.
Okay. Well, speaking of phone interviews, how would be the best way to get your skills across to your potential employer?
Well, a lot of the, great question. So a lot of the content that you're going to say on the phone is going to be similar, probably the same as that you're going to say face-to-face. However, the big difference is they can't see you. You can't make eye contact with them. So on the end of the only thing they have to go on to demonstrate, that will demonstrate your enthusiasm, your interest in the job, and your competency is what?
I'm sorry, Karyn, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, so I'm asking you the question. So if you're on a phone interview, what is the only way that an interviewer could tell how interested or enthusiastic you are about the job? I'll leave it there. They can't see you, right?
They can't see you, but they can hear it in your voice. And what I've noticed is that you can't see if someone is smiling and, you know, facially tell that they're enthusiastic about the position, but you can definitely hear it in someone's voice.
It's the only thing that you have over the phone to use is your voice. Exactly. So you're going to probably be preparing in the same way you would for a face-to-face interview. And the answers to your questions, perhaps tell me about yourself or your strengths or why do you want to work for us, is going to be the same as if you were there face-to-face, but all they can go on is your voice.
Right.
Right.
Okay, well, we have been getting a flood of great questions, so I would like to ask you another one that has to do with when you were talking about chemistry and how it can affect your interview. So one of the questions that was asked was if you could just elaborate a little bit more on what exactly you mean by the chemistry between you and your employer.
Sure. So chemistry can be defined in a couple of ways, and one way might be even by example. I remember several years ago going to interview for a job, and I felt when I came out of there that I was the absolute right candidate for the job. I had the skills, I had the qualifications. I thought that the interview went great. I thought I had great chemistry with the interviewer, that we got along well, we had an easy conversation, it didn't feel stilted or halting in any way. And when I was talking, so that's what we mean about chemistry, is that you just feel that the conversation goes well. You know, similar, and sometimes, would you believe that within the first 30 seconds of the interview, the interviewer has already decided whether or not there's chemistry or there isn't chemistry? I know it's crazy. It's almost like when you go out on a date and you decide, you know what, this just isn't clicking. And sometimes, so getting back to my story where I thought that I was the ideal candidate, a friend of mine said to me, you know what, you could look like that person's kindergarten teacher that they didn't like at all, and you weren't going to have a chance of getting that interview or going any further in that job search. So chemistry is about how well you perceive that you're getting along with the interviewer and how well they perceive they could work with you.
Okay. Well, you know, I know that if you do your research on your employer and the company that you'd like to work for, you would probably have more things to talk about. So other than LinkedIn, what would be a good way to do research about your company or your potential employer?
Okay.
Is there some sort of accessible database of the companies you can look at, or do you just have to go to their website?
Well, certainly, I mean, easy is to Google. There are other places that might be available through your schools, through your Career Services Center at your schools, like Vault. Maybe they subscribe to Dun & Bradstreet. But basically, if you Google, or you don't need to know all the ins and outs about a company. What you need to be able to demonstrate in terms of researching a company is basically going to their website. If you can, having a really as good an understanding as you can about some of the stuff that the company does. It's going to be impossible, I think, for you to know everything about the company or about maybe everything that goes on at a particular university. But you want to know enough. You want to know enough to impress upon the interviewer that you've done some homework on them. So check with your Career Services Center at your colleges and universities to see what databases they subscribe to, and you probably will have easy access to them. Again, Vault and Dun & Bradstreet are a couple of popular ones.
Okay, great. I hope that that was useful to a lot of you out there asking these questions. Another question that I'm interested in and other people are interested in is, should you bring extra copies of your resume to the interview, or should you go empty-handed?
I don't recommend going empty-handed. We can not assume that that your interviewers will have copies of your resume with them when you go in to talk with them. So hopefully in advance you know how many people you will be meeting with, and I would bring that number of resumes with me in probably some kind of an attaché or a folder that has inserts or pockets on the inside. And then what I tell my students is, if you notice that somebody, when you sit down for the interview, that the person does not have your resume out, then I recommend they say, I brought an extra copy of my resume with me. Would it be helpful for you to have it?
Okay.
And then
great.
They might, oh, great, that's fantastic. You may end up going home with all of the copies of your resume, or you may end up leaving a few behind, but better to be prepared than not.
Well, if you're in an interview and your employer knows all about you and your resume, but they also know about all the other applicants and their resumes, so how would you try and stand out among the crowd to get your employer to notice that you're the most qualified for the position?
Wow, that's a tough one. Chemistry may play a part in that. How well you get along. The questions that you ask may be a determining factor. And it may just come down to, you know what, these two candidates are fantastic. They're both equally competent. I don't think we could go wrong if we hired either one. And sometimes they just pick one. But the only thing that you have control over is how well prepared you are, how well you can talk to your resume, the strength of your, if you will, your car stories,
right,
and the research that you've done, and the enthusiasm that you bring. That's what you have control over.
Okay, well, if you have, if you bring extra copies of your resume just in case, should you also bring a CV, and what would be the page limit on that?
I think of CVs as the same as resumes, and maybe I'm thinking of that incorrectly. A lot of it depends on your level of experience. So,
Right.
The students that I work with, primarily, they should not be having more than a one-page resume. I probably would recommend not going over 2 unless you have an incredibly long list of publications to your name. But 2 would probably be the max. And again, that is very, very dependent on your job and educational experience.
Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to change gears a little bit with the type of questions that we're asking. So one question that has been extremely popular today is how you would approach a working visa question if you're an international student being interviewed.
Now, can we get some clarification on that in terms of if they would need to be sponsored?
Well, one question, for instance, says, about international students, our status sometimes requires extra work from the office we go to. There's a fear that if we emphasize it, we will scare the employer off. On the other hand, those are things that they must deal with. So how would you recommend approaching the subject?
We have several international students here on campus, and a student, as a student visa, they are, in terms of their co-op jobs, they're covered. It's a tough question, but you can't hide it. You just can't hide it. If an employer comes out and says, would you need sponsorship, you'd say, well, my visa is good until X date, and then you might need sponsorship. Or you could say that you are working on getting a green card. I must say that I am not an authority or an expert on all of the procedures that an international student needs to go through, or a graduate needs to go through in order to be hired. It does seem to be becoming more difficult to get a company who's willing to sponsor. But again, I'm afraid I'm probably I'm not expert at all on those procedures.
Okay. Well, yeah, most of our international student questions seem to deal with sponsorship. So, if there's anything else you can add to that, or, we can just move on to a different question.
Yeah, the only thing is that you need to be, when the question comes up, just be open, honest, direct about it, and then move on. Don't spend, I just would not dwell on it and, talk for a long period of time about it. Just admit what you know the facts are. Maybe you have done some research to help you to understand whether or not that company has been willing to sponsor employees in the past. One way that you might be able to do that, a roundabout way, I'm just thinking now off the top of my head, you could use LinkedIn to find employees who work in that particular company or that university, and those whose names sound like they might come from an area of the world where you come from, click on them, look at their profile, see what schools they went to, see if you can infer from what's written maybe in their LinkedIn profile whether or not they were indeed an international student and then and are now working at this particular company and therefore may have been sponsored. So perhaps through some of your research and your people research, you will be able to to be able to put that puzzle piece together.
Okay, great. All right, well, I would like to go back to what you should do during interviews. So if you were asked a question that seems slightly inappropriate, like, are you married, how should you deal with a question like that?
Ay, ay, ay. I know those inappropriate, illegal questions. Well, you can answer it directly if you want and say, yes, I am, and just go on with that. And you can be inwardly annoyed and wonder, gosh, if they ask that question, do I really want to work at this company? And you could also say, although I'm not sure how it would turn out, if you're really loving this job and really want to work there, you could say, I'm curious, how is that important, or how is that related to the particular job? Very, very tricky questions, those illegal questions. You know, do you have children? You need to make a judgment call for yourself at the time of the interview, whether or not you want to play with it, play along with it, and just go, yes, I'm married, and leave it at that, and wonder, oh, I'm curious, why did you ask that? Or tell me how that relates to the job. Or you can just say, tell me how that relates to the, why is that important? How would that factor into my job responsibilities? Sometimes you're just going to have to go with your gut in terms of how you want to answer that.
Right. Well, I think it's important that people be aware of what questions an employer should not be asking you. And then, like you said, it is a good way to judge whether or not you want to work for a company that asks you inappropriate questions in an interview.
Right. They should not be asking you about your religion. They really should not be asking you really questions about your personal life. Actually, one thing that you may want to, we didn't talk about this, but you may want to be aware of is that some companies and organizations do drug testing. And being hired is a condition of the drug test result. So I'm just throwing that out there, that you should be aware of that.
Right. I think that is very important to know and understand whenever you're going into a job interview.
And again, I have had students who have lost jobs, primarily, who have lost jobs because of a drug test that did not go in their favor.
Oh, wow. Well, let's see. I'm getting some really great questions about what you should do during interviews and what you should do to follow up after interviews. So what should you do if you don't hear anything back from a company within the amount of time that you expect?
Okay. Any ideas, Amanda?
Well, I think a follow-up is a great way to figure out, whether or not this employer is actually interested in you. And the first thing, like you said, is send a thank you. That's always important. And another thing that I think would be good to do is, if a week has gone by and you haven't heard anything, you might want to send them an email saying, is there anything else you need from me, and just restate how interested you are in the position.
Great points. So let me add to that. First of all, a thank you note. I didn't mention this earlier, but I think it should be important enough to be said. Not only do you want to thank the people who interviewed you for their time, but it gives you a terrific opportunity to again indicate why this job is good for you and why you're good for this job and the company and the team and the organization. So it gives you another opportunity to sell yourself to the company.
Okay.
So that's one thing. The second thing is if you don't hear, if they tell you that they're going to get back to you within a couple of weeks and they don't, well, you know what? Their urgency may not be your urgency. You're looking for a job and you want to hear immediately whether or not you're hired or not. And who knows what's going on their end, but they're not moving as quickly as you want them to move. So what I would do is wait a couple of weeks. I think a week is a little bit too short. I would send an email perhaps 2.5 weeks later. And by the way, your thank you notes can be via email. I'm not talking about hard copy thank you notes that go through snail mail. Anyway, so you've sent your thank you note, and then what I suggest is that you forward that thank you note a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 2.5 weeks later, so that they have the context. They remember, they go, oh, I remember I interviewed Amanda a couple of weeks ago. So now they put 2 and 2 together, and you're just saying, want you to know I'm still interested in this job and was just wondering about the status of my candidacy is an easy way to say it. Hope all is well. Best regards, Amanda.
Okay, great. Well, I know that a lot of people aren't sure what the protocol is for following up after an interview, so I think that is something really important that everyone should know.
And I would follow up probably no more than 3 times. You know, sort of the 3 strikes you're out. I'd say I'd follow up over, every couple of weeks over a period, of a month and a half or so, so no more than 3 times. And then if you don't hear back, I'd move on.
Okay.
Because you don't want to come across as, and I'm using this word loosely, you don't want to come across as being a stalker and camping out in their email constantly, because we've got to believe that the people who are interviewing you are extremely busy with their day-to-day tasks.
Well, if you, like you said, if you try to do follow-up 3 times and you don't hear anything back, do these 3 times include your initial thank you note?
No.
Okay.
So you send your thank you note, and then you can follow up, I would say, 3 times after that.
Okay.
And sometimes you are just not going to hear. You just aren't.
Well, I think it's important for everyone to stay positive whenever they're job searching and stay positive after an interview, because the process can, it can wear on you. And the best thing to do is go into it every time with a good attitude.
I will share with you that I have looked for jobs more times than I care to think. And each time when I've been out of work, I just say I am 1 day closer to finding my job.
Right.
You're just 1 day closer to finding your job. And you are going to end up exactly where you're supposed to be. That's what I believe.
I share the same feelings with you on that. So I've been asked a different kind of question about interviews that involves group interviews. This question in particular is if you are being interviewed by a group of people and one person in the group is negative towards you, how would you try to remain positive to keep the other interviewers in the room from being impacted by this negative person?
Oh, my goodness. You know something? I bet if that person is negative with you, I bet they're negative with a lot of other people, too. So you're just going to sit there and be your calm, confident self and answer your questions as well as you can. like I said, I suspect that if that person's behavior towards you is like that, that it shows up in other places as well. So hard to overcome. You may also want to think about, you know, if you were to be offered this job, how closely you'd have to work with that person and whether or not you'd want the job based on that.
Okay. Well, that is interesting because whenever I've been thinking about interviews, I don't tend to think about being interviewed by a group of people, but that does happen. So
actually, it happens a lot in higher ed. It happens a lot in higher ed. And the way chances are with a hiring committee or an interview, when you're being interviewed in a group, the group has gotten together in advance to identify what questions each person is going to ask you. When you are being interviewed by folks in a group, you want to, the person who's asking you the questions, you want to make eye contact with them most of the time. But you don't want to ignore the other people in the group. So you want to occasionally, you know, look at the person to your left or look at the person who's across the table and then go back to the person who asked the question. And then they're going to move on to another person, and that person's going to ask you a couple of questions, and you're going to do the same thing. Very, very common to have a group interview if you're going for, I think, a university research position or a teaching position.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that that element was added to our questions today because that is something that we need to think about whenever we're going to be interviewed. Is it going to be by a group or just one person? And those are things that you should find out.
And oh, by the way, you want to send thank you notes to all of those people, and you want them to be, each one to be slightly different.
Oh, okay. All right, so we have time for one more question, and the question that I would like to know and a few others would like to know is why did you say not to have more than 4 questions for the interview? Why is that the limit?
Oh, that, I guess that's my limit. There's no hard and fast rule about that, but you don't, my feeling is that you have your questions written down on a piece of paper or in the notebook that you bring in with you. And let's say that towards the end of the interview, the interviewer says to you, oh, do you have any questions about the job, or are there any questions that I can answer for you? So if you had a list of 20 questions and you said, oh, yes, I have a list of 20 questions here, Amanda, if you were that interviewer, how do you think you would feel as a result of that?
I might be slightly annoyed, actually, that they had so many questions, but also I would question whether or not they did the appropriate research before the job.
Right, right. So you just want to ask a few pertinent questions, and you want to pick them really, really carefully. So that's why I say 4, and actually could be 5, with those last 2 being, when do you expect to be making a hiring decision, and may I have your business card, which sort of doesn't really count as one of those questions. But you don't, they've probably already been sitting with you for maybe at least a half an hour, maybe even an hour. They're busy. They've got a lot of stuff going on. And you also want to, like Amanda said, appear that you've done some of your research. So questions like I showed you earlier are certainly appropriate, but another great question to ask is one that can help the company or the interviewer see you. You want them to be able to see you, actually imagine you in the job. So something like, let me just word this carefully for you. If I were to come on board, what would you like me to have accomplished within the first 3 months?
Right.
And you see how that question gets them thinking about, oh, wow, Amanda's really thinking about what it might be like to work here. And she's already thinking about what she could have accomplished in the first 3 months.
Yeah, I think by asking a question like that, it also shows that you feel enthusiastic about working there.
Good point. I agree.
Okay, well, it looks like we are out of time. Thanks again, Karyn, for your informative presentation, and now I'd like to hand things over to Crystal.
All right. Well, thank you, Amanda, very much, and Karyn for a wonderful presentation and a really, really interesting discussion. There were an incredible amount of questions coming in for the audience. So we apologize if we did not get to your questions today, and for those of you whose schedules permit, I think that there were maybe a couple questions and things that we could maybe talk about. If those people want to stick around, we may have a little more of a discussion. But for those of you who are signing off now, we do welcome you to follow up with the speakers. You can send an email to webinars@aps.org, and we'll forward your questions to the speaker for comment. Slides of this presentation will be available on the main page for today's webinar, which you should be directed to at the end of the broadcast. Also, a recording of today's webinar will be available and will appear on the webinar main page. Please allow 24 hours for us to get that uploaded to the website. And you will also receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinars with a link to the recording of today's presentation. Lastly, in order to help APS continue to develop quality webinar presentations, please help us by taking a moment to complete the short survey as you exit the webinar today. This wraps up today's event, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Okay, so just back to just a couple of questions. I think there was one question also about how to handle questions about past jobs in interviews.
Right. Yes, I did see that on there. I was interested to see what the answer to that would be.
So, Crystal or Amanda, can you say that again about a question about past jobs?
Like
Sure.
If you left and they asked you, why did you leave?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess a lot of it would depend upon the circumstances. So do you think that this is if you were laid off or you were fired? Do you think that's the basis of the question? Well, let me go there anyway. Let me go there. First of all, an employer wants to see that you have some stability. So if they see that you've changed jobs every few months, then that may be a red flag for them, and it may be you'll need to work on a story about the truthful story about why you've changed jobs so much, and it's just really hard for me to be able to answer that without knowing the specific circumstances. If you are laid off from work, certainly, gosh, most people have been in that position. You say my company was going through a restructuring and a downsize, and my group was eliminated, and that's why I'm looking for a position. If you were, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just had another response from the same person asking that question to clarify what you were looking for.
Okay.
So what she was asking was either if you left voluntarily because you didn't like your job or if you were laid off. Sometimes jobs don't work out, and it might sound bad to get into an interview about that.
Okay, so being laid off is something that's happened to many, 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 many of us, including myself. And given the financial and the economic downturn over the last 4 years or so, being laid off is something that you can come right out and say. My company or my organization was going through a restructuring. They were downsizing, and my group was reduced in size. And that's absolutely common, and many people will understand that. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. So it was laid off, or why did you leave? Why did you leave?
If you just didn't like your job. Yes.
Yeah, you just felt that it was just not the best fit for you. You were looking to do other things. So either you wanted a job that was more research focused, or you wanted a job that had more that was more engineering focused, or you really wanted to teach. Or maybe you found that the job was too isolating for you. You prefer working with people as opposed to working by yourself. You prefer being part of a team as opposed to being independent. There was really too much travel involved and too much time away from your family. So again, it sort of depends on the reasons why you left, but you can always come up with basically the job just didn't fit you for whatever reason. And you're not going to spend a lot of time dwelling on that. You're just going to state it and move on.
Okay. Well, speaking of traveling for your job or your potential job, whenever you're being interviewed and your potential employer asks you about moving states, if that's required for your job, would it be appropriate to negotiate that or ask for some sort of help whenever you need to move to a different state?
You mean, so to have some relocation reimbursement?
Either that or where you could possibly find a place to live, or just general information on those sorts of things.
Okay. So chances are you would know if there were relocation funds available to you. So in the course, so once the job, you know that it's up front, you know that it's going to be in a different city. And when I wouldn't in the first interview ask about relocation assistance. But in the second, or if there are more than 2 interviews, then you can bring up, tell me, so this is one of the questions that you want to know. Tell me, is there relocation assistance? They'll say either yes or no. Then from there you can say, is there someone or is there an organization or a department in the company or in the university who could at least connect me with a realtor, or that can help me find an apartment or a house, or indicate the communities where I might want to look to live. If relocation assistance is a make it or break it for you, then that will answer your question. You know, if you can relocate by yourself, fine. Frequently in the job description, it will say relocation assistance available or not available. So you may know that pretty early on. But as you go through the interview process, you'll want to ask that question and have that clarified before you make your decision whether or not to stay in the running for the job or to back out.
Okay. Okay, that's great, because that's, I was not aware whether or not that was an appropriate thing to ask during an interview, or if that was a common thing to ask if you have a job you're applying for that is asking you to relocate.
Again, I wouldn't ask it in the first interview. I wouldn't ask it probably over the phone, in a phone screen interview. I would ask it later on in the process, maybe the second time you've spoken to them and said, I've been meaning to ask you, is there this hasn't come up in our conversations before. And you know what, I might not even say, is there relocation? I'd say, what is the relocation policy? and let them tell you. What is the relocation policy?
Okay. Well, we have time for just one more question, and it's something that I would just like to ask you, and you know, I'm sure other students are curious of this also, but what would be the single biggest stumbling block you've seen in your experience for students looking for their jobs?
The biggest stumbling block. All right, so among my physics students, the biggest stumbling block is most of them want to do some kind of research in a physics lab, yet they don't have any research experience, right? How do you get research experience if no one will hire you?
Right.
So that is the biggest stumbling block for my students who are looking for their first co-op. So anything, what I talk to the freshmen about doing and what I talk to maybe the first semester sophomores about doing is, if you will, drinking the REU Kool-Aid. So I bet most everybody on the phone knows what an REU is, right?
Karen, why don't you just elaborate in case they don't?
Yeah, so they're research experiences for undergraduates. They frequently are like summer internships on university campuses, and they provide fantastic learning experiences, hands-on research learning experiences with key researchers. And any student, usually I was just looking into this week, the application process typically starts in early December, and deadlines for applications are due frequently by February 1st. It is a great way to spend a summer for an undergraduate. And it can be in a wide variety of places. Because Northeastern is not Harvard or MIT, I recommend, or Stanford, right? Really good school, right, but there's tons of competition out there. So I recommend that students apply for research positions in areas that are not as geographically desirable, let's say, as Palo Alto. So last summer I had a student who had an REU experience in Fairbanks, Alaska, and another one who had an experience at the University of Florida in Tampa, and both of them came back raving about the experience. And those experiences provide a great leverage for future research opportunities. And the housing is easy. You get a stipend, and your living expenses, if I recall correctly, are taken care of. And they provide social activities for you to get to know the other students who are participating better. So that's a long answer to what are the stumbling blocks, but it's getting those initial research experiences under your belt. So for undergrads in particular, anything that you can do to shadow or intern with a researcher on campus so that you can put that on your resume will go a long way for you.
I'm just going to interject really quickly to the audience. I have entered a URL in your, which you should be able to see, that has a link to the Nucleus REU database. So you can actually search for REU programs through that link.
Fantastic.
Just from personal experience, I am a big advocate for internships. The amount of experience you get is irreplaceable, honestly. It was one of the best things I could have done as an undergraduate. So I advise all of you, do not hesitate to apply for an REU or any type of physics internship, because that experience that you get is extremely valuable.
And don't hesitate to check out, I mean, as part of your research, check out what research is happening on your university or college campus and approach the primary investigator or the professor to see if there is something that you could help with in their labs. They're frequently looking for people who are enthusiastic and who are willing to learn. And then it can also provide you with a great reference when you start your job search.
Very true.
Excellent. Yeah, and also just interjecting, Amanda, I shared your profile from the SPS National Internship page in case people want to check out the SPS National Internship program. Also, I should mention, and I'll type it in the window here momentarily, that APS actually has an internship page. If you go to the APS career site, under physics employment, you'll see a link to the big list that we have of internships that students can look at. It has all the information about the different programs. So I encourage you to look there as well. All right, well, I think that is all the time that we actually have for today. Once again, I want to thank both of you so much for taking the time to speak with us and this great discussion. And I hope that everyone enjoyed the discussion. And again, if they have any further questions, they can email me, and I will make sure that Karyn gets your questions. And please remember to fill out the survey whenever you exit. All right, thanks very much to both of you.
Thank
you for having us.
All right. Okay, bye-bye.